The official summons arrived on a Tuesday, delivered through encrypted diplomatic channels with security protocols that seemed excessive for what Marcus Webb assumed would be routine paperwork. The message was formal to the point of obscurity, requesting his presence at the Central Diplomatic Complex in New Geneva for matters of significant interstellar importance, requiring immediate personal attendance. He read it 3 times over coffee that went cold during his attempts to parse the bureaucratic language, eventually concluding someone had either made an administrative error or his military pension had triggered unexpected tax complications requiring face-to-face resolution. Marcus had been civilian for 7 years now, ever since the frontier conflicts concluded with treaties everyone agreed were preferable to continued violence, but nobody seemed particularly enthusiastic about celebrating. The war had been ugly in the way border conflicts always were. Lots of confused fighting over territory that didn't matter as much as the strategic analysts claimed, casualties on all sides, an eventual negotiated settlement that left everyone vaguely dissatisfied but too exhausted to continue fighting. He'd done his service, survived mostly intact, and transitioned to managing logistics for civilian shipping company. The work was considerably less exciting than military operations, but featured dramatically reduced probability of being shot at, which he considered reasonable trade-off. The diplomatic complex occupied several city blocks in New Geneva's administrative district, all sweeping architectural curves and materials that shifted color based on ambient lighting conditions. Marcus arrived 20 minutes early because military habits persisted long after discharge, checked in with security who seemed unsurprised by his presence despite his own confusion, and was escorted through corridors displaying rotating art installations from various species. He recognized maybe 1 in 5 pieces, the rest operating on aesthetic principles his human visual processing couldn't properly appreciate. His escort, young diplomatic staffer whose badge identified her as Protocol Assistant 3rd Class, maintained professional silence until they reached an antechamber outside what appeared to be major ceremonial space. The walls here were actual stone rather than the synthetic materials used elsewhere, giving the area weight and permanence that suggested historical significance. "Please wait here, Mr. Webb. You'll be called when they're ready." The ceremony should last approximately 30 minutes. She delivered this information with the efficiency of someone reciting it for the dozenth time that day. "What ceremony?" Marcus asked, but she'd already departed with the purposeful speed of someone with 17 overlapping responsibilities. He sat in the waiting area, reviewing what little he actually knew about this situation. The summons hadn't specified which government entity wanted to speak with him, or what significant interstellar importance actually entailed. For all he knew, this was elaborate presentation for routine veterans' commendation that some bureaucrat had decided required unnecessary ceremony. The antechamber featured a display screen showing live feed from the ceremonial hall beyond. Marcus watched various delegations arranging themselves according to protocols he didn't understand. Velaran representatives in their characteristic flowing robes, human diplomatic corps in formal attire that managed to look simultaneously professional and uncomfortable. Several species he recognized only vaguely from news coverage of treaty negotiations. The sheer number of official observers suggested this was considerably more significant than routine paperwork, which increased his anxiety proportionally. 25 minutes passed with Marcus mentally reviewing possible explanations for his summons and rejecting most of them as implausible. A different escort appeared, significantly more senior based on elaborate diplomatic insignia, and gestured for him to follow. "Mr. Webb, they're ready. Please proceed directly to the central platform when you enter. Her Highness will address you personally." "I'm sorry, which Highness?" Marcus tried to ask, but the escort was already guiding him through massive doors into the ceremonial hall proper, and his question disappeared into the acoustic shift from quiet antechamber to vast formal space designed for important pronouncements. The hall was enormous, vaulted ceiling incorporating bioluminescent elements that created lighting effects probably meaningful in ways he lacked cultural context to appreciate. Diplomatic delegations from at least 15 species were arranged in formal semicircular tiers, all attention focused on the central platform, where Marcus was apparently expected to stand. He walked forward with the kind of deliberate composure that came from years of military discipline covering profound internal uncertainty, aware that hundreds of beings were watching him cross the polished floor. As he reached the platform, a figure emerged from the primary Velaran delegation, tall, elegant, moving with absolute confidence that suggested lifetime of wielding authority. She wore formal robes that incorporated traditional design elements with modern diplomatic styling, and her silver-threaded skin markings indicated royal lineage extending back multiple generations. Marcus's limited knowledge of Velaran customs identified her as high-ranking royalty, though he couldn't determine exact position in succession. She approached the platform where he stood, close enough that he could see her eyes, vertical pupils capable of parsing visual information across broader spectrum than human vision allowed, studying his face with intense focus that made him acutely uncomfortable. When she spoke, her voice carried across the hall with natural projection suggesting either excellent acoustics or subtle amplification technology. "Do you remember me, human?" The question wasn't hostile or accusatory. It carried something that might have been hope mixed with genuine uncertainty. 7 years ago, during the Battle of Kessin Ridge, when artillery bombardment trapped my unit behind enemy lines and escape seemed impossible, do you remember pulling a Velaran soldier from transport wreckage under sustained enemy fire? Marcus's brain performed rapid archive search, pulling up memories he'd spent years trying to organize into manageable mental storage. Kessin Ridge had been nightmare engagement, 72 hours of fighting over strategic positions that ultimately proved irrelevant because treaty negotiations had already begun. He remembered artillery creating hell on Earth, remembered screaming in multiple languages, remembered doing what training demanded, which was extract as many people as possible regardless of uniform or species. The specific details had blurred together into generalized recollection of crisis response and survival instinct. "I remember pulling several people from wreckage during that battle," he said carefully, aware hundreds of beings were analyzing every word. "Kessin Ridge was chaotic. We were trying to get everyone out before positions got completely overrun. You pulled me specifically from collapsed transport that had taken direct artillery hit," she said with absolute certainty. "You didn't ask my rank or verify my affiliation. You simply saw someone trapped who couldn't reach safety alone, and you acted without hesitation. You carried me approximately 2 kilometers under sustained hostile fire to reach evacuation point, then immediately returned to help others before I could properly thank you." Marcus searched his memory, trying to match her description to specific incidents from battle that had mostly become blur of crisis management. He vaguely remembered Velaran soldier, badly injured leg, communication equipment destroyed, trapped under structural debris requiring 2 people to safely shift. He'd helped extract her, gotten her to medical evacuation, moved immediately to next crisis because there were always more people who needed help and never enough time or resources. "I remember helping Velaran soldier with severe leg injuries," he said slowly, pieces starting to connect. "But I didn't know who you were specifically. You were just another person who needed extraction from impossible situation." "Exactly." She smiled, the expression transforming formal royal composure into something genuinely warm. "You saved my life without knowing I was crowned Princess Thessara, second in succession to the Velaran sovereignty throne. To you, I was simply another soldier who couldn't be abandoned. That selfless action, performed without knowledge of my identity or expectation of reward, created what my people call Kelethmer, a bond of honor considered sacred and absolutely unbreakable. The ceremonial hall maintained profound silence. Marcus felt several hundred beings watching him process this information and realized with growing comprehension that he hadn't been summoned for paperwork. He'd accidentally saved alien royalty 7 years ago without knowing it, and apparently that carried consequences he was only beginning to understand. His Tuesday had taken a turn he absolutely hadn't anticipated when reviewing shipping manifests that morning. Princess Thessara gestured toward the assembled delegations with fluid grace that suggested years of formal training. When I returned to my people after Kessin Ridge, I reported what had happened, that a human soldier had saved my life without knowing my identity, without seeking advantage or recognition, purely because abandoning someone was unthinkable to him. My advisors began immediate investigation to identify you and understand your character. That investigation took 7 years. Marcus asked, then immediately worried that questioning royal timeline might violate some diplomatic protocol. But Thessara seemed more amused than offended by the observation. The investigation itself took approximately 3 months. We identified you within 6 weeks after Kessin Ridge concluded. She moved closer, her expression carrying what might have been regret mixed with determination. What required 7 years was convincing the Sovereignty Council that my proposed response was appropriate, rather than emotionally compromised decision-making that would create problematic precedents. What response specifically? In Velaran culture, a life saved during battle creates Kelethmer, a bond of honor that transcends political allegiance, family obligation, or personal preference. The person whose life was saved incurs a debt that must be properly acknowledged and, when possible, appropriately repaid. But you saved the crown princess, which creates substantial complications because the debt I owe you potentially conflicts with my responsibilities to the sovereignty. Thessara's voice carried weight of someone who'd spent years navigating exactly this tension. The council argued that acknowledging the debt might create political complications with human governments, might suggest weakness in our diplomatic posture, might establish precedent that would complicate future military engagements. And you disagreed with that assessment. I argued that honoring Kelethmer was more important than political convenience. That failing to acknowledge a legitimate debt of honor would violate our most fundamental cultural values in ways that would ultimately prove more damaging than any diplomatic complications. That your action deserved proper recognition regardless of the political inconvenience it might create. She smiled with satisfaction. It required 7 years of persistent argument and strategic maneuvering, but I eventually convinced enough council members to proceed. Which brings us to today's formal ceremony. Marcus looked around at the assembled diplomatic delegations, noting the elaborate preparation and formal protocols being observed. This seems like extremely elaborate setup just for saying thank you. Not that I don't appreciate the gesture, but you could have sent a personal message. Kelethmer cannot be satisfied through simple expressions of gratitude. The debt must be formally acknowledged before official witnesses representing both our peoples, and the saved person must offer something of genuine substantial value to demonstrate the debt is being taken with appropriate seriousness. Thessara's voice shifted to ceremonial formality that carried across the hall. Marcus Webb, human veteran of the frontier conflicts, you saved my life at Kessin Ridge without knowledge of my identity or expectation of personal reward. You acted from pure conviction that no person should be abandoned when assistance was possible. That action created Kelethmer that I have waited 7 years to properly honor before witnesses. Your Highness, I genuinely appreciate this formal recognition, but I was simply doing what anyone would do in that situation. You don't owe me anything for basic human decency during crisis. That's precisely where human and Velaran cultural understanding diverges most significantly, Thessara said, her tone suggesting she'd anticipated this response. In my culture, what you describe as basic human decency represents the highest possible form of honor, action taken without calculation of personal benefit, risk accepted without expectation of reward or recognition. The fact that you consider such behavior unremarkable makes it more valuable to us, not less. She gestured, and several formal attendants approached carrying what appeared to be official documentation on materials that looked more ceremonial than practical, actual parchment, or something similar rather than digital displays. I offer you three things in formal acknowledgement of Kelethmer. First, recognition as honor keeper of the Velaran sovereignty, a formal title that grants you permanent diplomatic status and the right to petition the crown directly on any matter you consider important, regardless of its official priority. Marcus felt his anxiety level spike considerably. Your Highness, I don't need diplomatic status. I manage shipping logistics for civilian company. I coordinate transport schedules and resolve supply chain complications. Nevertheless, you have earned the right according to our most ancient customs. Whether you choose to exercise that right is entirely your decision to make. She indicated the second document being presented. Second, I hereby establish a comprehensive cultural exchange program in your name, providing funding for human scholars to study Velaran history and traditions, while Velaran scholars engage in reciprocal study of human culture and values. This creates lasting institutional connection between our peoples, extending the bond created by your action at Kessin Ridge across generations. That's actually remarkably generous. Thank you, Your Highness. And third, Thessara paused, and something in her formal expression shifted to reveal genuine vulnerability beneath the royal composure. I offer you the position of personal advisor to the Crown Princess, with permanent residence at the sovereignty capital and full participation in diplomatic council proceedings. You saved my life once through immediate action, without calculation of consequences. I would deeply value your perspective and counsel as I navigate decisions that affect millions of lives across multiple star systems. The ceremonial hall remained completely silent, but Marcus acutely felt the weight of attention from hundreds of beings watching this exchange, with varying degrees of surprise, curiosity, or skepticism. He processed what Thessara was actually offering, essentially requesting that he abandon his established life, relocate to an alien civilization, and become formal advisor to royalty based primarily on one crisis response action he'd taken 7 years ago without considering long-term implications. Your Highness, I'm genuinely honored by the offer, but I'm not qualified to advise royalty on matters of interstellar diplomatic importance. I'm a logistics coordinator who happened to be in the right position during a chaotic battle to help someone who desperately needed assistance. You're a person who observed someone in immediate crisis and acted without hesitation, without calculation of personal cost or strategic advantage, without even knowing whether the risk you were accepting would produce successful outcome. Thessara's voice carried absolute conviction. That quality, the ability to act from pure principle rather than careful cost-benefit analysis, is exactly what I need represented in my advisory council. Too many of my current council members think primarily in terms of political advantage and strategic positioning. I need someone who thinks in terms of this is fundamentally the right thing to do and acts accordingly. Thinking that way got substantial numbers of people killed during the frontier conflicts and saved my life at Kessin Ridge. The same conviction that creates risk in some contexts also creates possibility for genuine positive change in others. She met his eyes with direct intensity. I'm not asking you to make immediate decision. Take time to seriously consider the offer. Visit the sovereignty capital, observe what the advisor position would actually entail on a daily basis, determine whether it represents work you'd find genuinely meaningful. But understand that the offer is completely sincere, and the need is absolutely real.
It's like jail, stick out like a nail and get hammered, danger knows.
Marcus looked at her, really looked properly for the first time since she'd revealed her identity, and saw something beyond the formal princess addressing assembled diplomatic delegations. He saw the injured soldier he'd pulled from wreckage 7 years ago, someone who'd been terrified and in severe pain, but had maintained enough composure to follow instructions until reaching relative safety. Someone who'd said thank you with profound sincerity before he'd rushed away to help others, because there was always someone else who desperately needed assistance and never enough time to provide it adequately. "Can I ask you something?" he said, suddenly aware that the entire diplomatic assembly was listening to this exchange, but somehow not particularly caring about the protocol implications. "When I was pulling you from that wreckage at Kesson Ridge, you asked me why I was helping you specifically. Do you remember what I answered?" Thesara's formal expression softened with clear recognition. "You said because you can't extract yourself alone, and no one should have to die alone when help is possible to provide." Those exact words. I've remembered them every single day for 7 years. I meant them completely. I still mean them now. That's not special wisdom or unique philosophical perspective. It's just basic conviction that people fundamentally matter, and helping them when possible is the only reasonable response to observing crisis. Yes, exactly. That's precisely what I need represented in my advisory council. She smiled with genuine warmth. Someone who operates from that conviction automatically and naturally, rather than having to carefully calculate whether compassionate action is strategically advantageous in current political context. The formal ceremony concluded with elaborate diplomatic protocols that Marcus barely registered consciously, his mind still actively processing the unexpected direction his ordinary Tuesday had taken. He was escorted to a private conference room where Thesara joined him after completing her ceremonial obligations. The formal robes exchanged for more practical diplomatic attire that suggested she was ready for substantive conversation rather than performative ceremony. "You look substantially overwhelmed," she observed with slight amusement, settling into a chair with casual grace that suggested years of practice making formal positioning appear completely natural. "I woke up this morning expecting routine day of managing shipping manifests and resolving minor supply chain complications. Now I'm apparently a diplomatic honor keeper being offered position as formal advisor to alien royalty. Overwhelmed seems like entirely reasonable emotional response. Fair assessment of the situation." Thesara activated a holographic display showing what appeared to be detailed information about the cultural exchange program she'd mentioned during the ceremony. "I should clarify that you're not obligated to accept any of these offers beyond the formal recognition itself. The Kelithmer is technically satisfied through the public acknowledgement ceremony we just completed. Everything beyond that represents genuine invitation, rather than culturally required acceptance. But you would strongly prefer I accept the advisor position. I would genuinely value your perspective and your presence on the council. But I recognize that accepting requires abandoning your established life for something completely unfamiliar in an alien culture you currently know very little about. That's substantial personal sacrifice to request based on one formal conversation, regardless of the historical connection." She dismissed the holographic display with a gesture. "Tell me about your current work in detail. What does shipping logistics coordination actually involve on a daily operational basis?" Marcus found himself explaining his job. The practical challenges of coordinating complex transport schedules across multiple companies and competing jurisdictions. The constant creative problem-solving required when shipments faced unexpected delays or complications. The genuine satisfaction of making complex systems work efficiently despite inherent chaos and human error. Thesara listened with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than performed politeness, asking substantive questions that revealed she was actually processing the information rather than just waiting for him to finish speaking. "You clearly enjoy the problem-solving aspect," she noted perceptively. "Finding workable solutions when established systems break down or face genuinely unexpected complications. It's what I'm demonstrably good at. Military service taught me to adapt quickly when careful plans fail catastrophically, which happens constantly in civilian logistics operations. The work genuinely matters. People and businesses need supplies delivered reliably, and I can observe direct, tangible results from the solutions I implement. That's not fundamentally different from what the advisory role would actually entail. Helping navigate complex problems, identifying workable solutions when established diplomatic approaches fail, ensuring that policy decisions account for practical implementation realities rather than just abstract theoretical principles." Thesara leaned forward with evident interest. The primary difference would be scale and ultimate consequences. Instead of coordinating shipping manifests affecting hundreds of customers, you'd be helping coordinate diplomatic initiatives affecting billions of lives across multiple civilizations, which represents significantly more pressure and personal responsibility than I'm comfortable accepting. Completely understandable concern, but consider this perspective. At Kesson Ridge, you made critical split-second decisions affecting people's immediate survival under conditions of extreme stress and profoundly incomplete information. You demonstrated capability for exactly the kind of practical judgment I need represented on the Council, acting from solid foundational principles despite chaos and fundamental uncertainty about outcomes. Marcus considered this framing seriously, attempting to separate his instinctive resistance to major life-changing decisions from genuine, honest assessment of whether the proposed role made practical sense. What would the position actually look like on routine daily basis? What would you realistically expect from an advisor in normal circumstances? Honest perspective without political filtering. When I'm actively considering diplomatic initiatives or major policy decisions, I need people who will tell me directly when I'm wrong or when I'm missing critically important considerations. Too many current advisors tell me what they believe I want to hear, or what advances their own political interests and factional agendas. I need someone whose primary operational concern is whether the decision is actually fundamentally right rather than whether it's politically advantageous in current climate. That approach could create substantial ongoing conflict with your existing council members and their established interests. Almost certainly will create significant conflict, but productive conflict that genuinely improves decision-making quality is extremely valuable. Unchallenged assumptions and comfortable consensus typically lead to poor outcomes with serious consequences. Thesara activated a different holographic display, this one showing what appeared to be luxurious residential quarters. This would be your personal accommodation at the sovereignty capital. Private residence with full amenities, access to extensive cultural resources for learning Velaran customs and language, dedicated staff support for managing daily necessities, while you adapt to the fundamentally new environment. The quarters shown in the display were significantly more luxurious than Marcus's current modest apartment. Not ostentatious exactly, but clearly designed for substantial comfort and practical functionality. You've invested considerable thought into this offer over the years. I've had 7 years to develop detailed plans, while systematically convincing the Council to approve formal acknowledgement of Kelethmer. I wanted to offer something genuinely meaningful with real substance, rather than purely ceremonial position with no actual purpose or influence. She dismissed the display. Visit the Capitol. Spend 2 full weeks observing what the role actually entails in practice. Talk extensively with my current advisors. Attend council sessions. Observe diplomatic negotiations. See what you'd actually be agreeing to before making any final decision. The cultural exchange program will move forward regardless of your personal choice. Your name is already formally attached to it, but the advisor position requires your active, willing participation to be genuinely meaningful. That 2 weeks seems like reasonable time frame for proper evaluation. Excellent. I'll arrange diplomatic transport and appropriate accommodation. You're welcome to bring anyone you'd like. Family members, close friends, professional colleagues who might provide useful perspective on the decision. She paused thoughtfully. Do you have immediate family who should be included in this evaluation process? Understood completely. The diplomatic transport will be fully prepared within 3 days. That should give you adequate time to arrange temporary leave from your current position and prepare mentally for extended absence. Thesara stood smoothly, extending her hand in the human gesture of formal agreement that she'd clearly studied. Thank you for considering this offer seriously rather than immediately dismissing it as impractical or overwhelming. Marcus shook her hand, noting that Velaran body temperature ran several degrees cooler than human baseline. Thank you for waiting 7 full years to properly acknowledge something I did without expecting any form of recognition. That level of sustained commitment to cultural values, despite political opposition, is genuinely impressive. Cultural values and principles only genuinely matter if we actually honor them in practice, especially when doing so proves difficult or creates political complications. She smiled with evident warmth. I'll see you in 3 days, Marcus Webb. Prepare yourself for complete immersion in Velaran culture that will probably feel utterly overwhelming initially, but should become reasonably comfortable with dedicated time and effort. The next 3 days passed in a blur of practical preparation and increasingly surreal conversations with friends and colleagues who struggled to fully believe his account of recent unexpected events. His closest friend, Sarah Chen, a former military colleague who now worked in municipal government, summarized the general consensus reaction. You pulled someone from a battlefield 7 years ago, and now you're being actively recruited to advise alien royalty. That's the kind of improbable story people tell at bars that absolutely no one believes actually happened. I'm having substantial difficulty believing it myself, but the diplomatic credentials are definitely legitimate, and the transport arrangements are absolutely real. Are you actually seriously considering accepting this position long-term? Marcus thought about the question with genuine care. I'm considering evaluating it properly and thoroughly before making final decision. The work might prove genuinely meaningful. Using problem-solving skills and practical judgment, I've developed over years to help navigate decisions affecting billions of lives instead of just optimizing shipping routes and delivery schedules. That seems potentially worthwhile if I can actually contribute something valuable, or potentially so overwhelming it causes complete psychological breakdown. Also distinctly possible, which is precisely why I'm taking 2 full weeks to evaluate properly before making any binding commitment. The diplomatic transport to the Velaran sovereignty capital was luxury Marcus had never personally experienced. Private shuttle with accommodations suggesting unlimited budget and design philosophy, centered entirely on passenger comfort and convenience. The journey required 8 hours, giving him substantial time to review the extensive cultural briefing materials Thesara's staff had thoughtfully provided. Velaran society apparently valued honor above most other principles, direct honest communication, and what they called truth in action. The foundational concept that genuine character was revealed through actual behavior under pressure rather than through stated intentions or performed values. He found that principle genuinely appealing. It matched his own instinctive approach to evaluating people based on what they actually did rather than what they merely claimed to believe. The Sovereignty Capital was remarkable architectural achievement that somehow blended organic aesthetic principles with entirely practical urban infrastructure, structures that appeared to have grown naturally, while still providing all necessary functionality of modern city systems. Marcus was escorted to the residential quarters Thessara had shown him, which proved even more impressive experiencing directly than the holographic display had suggested. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked extensive gardens incorporating both Velaran and specifically human botanical elements, a deliberate accommodation gesture he recognized and appreciated. Thessara arrived that same evening for informal dinner that felt more like conversation between professional colleagues than formal diplomatic meeting. She'd arranged for human-compatible cuisine prepared according to recipes her culinary staff had extensively researched, though she freely admitted the results were probably imperfect approximations at best. "It's genuinely good," Marcus assured her after sampling what appeared to be some variation of pasta with vegetable sauce. "Close enough to familiar comfort food that I sincerely appreciate the considerable effort involved." "Excellent outcome. I worried we might accidentally create something that looked superficially correct, but tasted absolutely terrible through fundamental cultural misunderstanding of flavor profile expectations." She was eating traditional Velaran cuisine involving numerous crystallized elements Marcus didn't recognize. "Tomorrow, you'll observe a full council session. Fair warning, it will probably prove extremely tedious. Most practical governance involves extensive discussion of routine administrative matters with minimal dramatic tension. I manage shipping logistics professionally. I'm intimately familiar with tedious administrative discussions about resource allocation and scheduling conflicts." The council session the following day was indeed tedious in ways that felt somehow universal across all sapient species. People arguing extensively about budget allocations and jurisdictional boundaries, with passion seeming disproportionate to actual stakes involved. But Marcus noticed something genuinely interesting. Thessara listened carefully to all expressed perspectives before offering her own considered assessment, and when she did speak, people paid serious attention not merely because of her royal rank, but because her analysis proved consistently clear and well-reasoned. After the session concluded, she introduced him formally to her senior advisors, beings from various backgrounds who'd earned their positions through demonstrated competence rather than political connections or family influence. They expressed polite curiosity about the human who'd saved the princess's life and was now apparently being seriously considered for advisory role. "What specific perspective would you bring that we currently lack?" asked Keseth, an elderly Velaran whose formal role involved cultural preservation and historical analysis. Marcus considered the direct question with genuine honesty. "I don't know your culture nearly well enough yet to identify specific gaps in current advisory coverage. But I can offer perspective from someone who makes critical decisions based on practical necessity rather than political calculation. When genuine crisis requires immediate action, you move based on what will actually work in practice, rather than what sounds most impressive in official reports or theoretical analysis." Keseth seemed genuinely satisfied with that answer. Truth in action. The princess values this quality extremely highly, sometimes to the considerable frustration of those of us who instinctively prefer more careful deliberation before major decisions. Over the following 2 weeks, Marcus attended numerous diplomatic sessions, participated in extensive cultural briefings, and engaged in substantive informal discussions that gradually built his understanding of what the advisor role would actually entail on daily operational basis. He observed Thessara skillfully navigating complex negotiations between competing interests, consistently maintaining personal integrity, while somehow finding workable solutions that satisfied core needs even when they couldn't address all stated preferences. He also noticed she frequently asked for his opinion on matters being actively discussed, demonstrating genuine interest in his perspective even when it differed substantially from prevailing council consensus. His professional background in practical logistics gave him useful understanding of implementation challenges that purely theoretical policy discussions sometimes overlooked completely. You're remarkably effective at identifying when proposed solutions won't actually work in practical application. Thessara noted after one session, where Marcus had pointed out significant logistical problems with an ambitious infrastructure proposal. That's extremely valuable capability. Council members sometimes become overly attached to elegant theoretical frameworks without adequately considering practical execution challenges. Logistics work teaches you very quickly that elegant theories fail constantly and predictably when they encounter messy, chaotic reality. Much better to design explicitly for messy reality from the initial planning stages. On the final day of his 2-week evaluation period, Thessara invited him to a private garden space that apparently served as her personal retreat from constant official obligations. They walked together among carefully cultivated plants from dozens of different worlds, a diverse collection she'd assembled over years of diplomatic service and cultural exchange. "You've seemed noticeably more comfortable here over the past week," she observed accurately, "less overwhelmed by the unfamiliar environment and cultural differences. Your staff has been extremely helpful teaching me basic protocols and providing essential cultural context. I'm starting to understand how Velaran society actually functions in practice, even if I don't have deep historical knowledge yet. Deep comprehensive knowledge requires years of dedicated study. Basic functional understanding is entirely sufficient as a reasonable starting point." She stopped near a carefully maintained cluster of earth plants, roses that had been painstakingly cultivated to thrive in Velaran climate conditions. "I brought these back from diplomatic visit to Earth 5 years ago. Wanted a tangible reminder of the species whose soldier saved my life without knowing my identity or seeking any advantage." Marcus touched one of the roses gently, noting the careful cultivation. "You really have spent 7 years thinking regularly about Kessin Ridge and its implications." That event fundamentally shaped my understanding of what genuine honor actually looks like in practice. Action taken without calculation of personal benefit. Risk accepted without expectation of reward or recognition. Assistance provided because it was fundamentally right rather than strategically advantageous. Thessara met his eyes with absolute directness. "I want to need that quality actively present in my advisory council. Too many critical decisions are made based primarily on what's politically safe rather than what's actually morally right. And you believe I can reliably provide that perspective. I believe you already have provided it multiple times during the past 2 weeks. You've questioned proposals everyone else accepted without serious challenge, identified problems others completely overlooked, offered alternative solutions based on practical reality rather than theoretical elegance." She smiled warmly. "You've also made several notable cultural mistakes that my staff found amusing but appreciated, because they came from genuine attempt to engage respectfully rather than performative courtesy. I'm absolutely going to keep making cultural mistakes if I accept this position permanently. Undoubtedly true, we'll all learn valuable lessons from them." Thessara's expression turned more serious. "I'm not asking you to abandon who you fundamentally are or pretend to be something you're not. I'm asking you to bring exactly your authentic perspective and practical approach to helping navigate decisions that affect billions of lives. Will you accept the advisor position?" Marcus looked at the earth roses thriving in alien soil, thought carefully about the past 2 weeks of genuinely meaningful work and authentic connection, with people sincerely trying to make good decisions under complex circumstances.